So, last time we talked, the mask came off. My husband's performance as the sad, grieving victim shattered, and I saw the man from the diary, the one who said he'd rather see his wife in a coffin than with another man. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I packed a bag. Fear has a taste. It's metallic, like blood in your mouth. And in that moment, standing in the silent hallway with a duffel bag in my hand, my whole world tasted of it. The man I married wasn't just a liar. He was a cage builder, and I could finally feel the walls closing in. My plan was simple. Grab my daughter, grab the diary, disappear before he came back. But in a house full of secrets, there's no such thing as a simple escape. Today, you're going to see that escape plan crash and burn in spectacular fashion, stopped first by a devastating betrayal from my own daughter. And then, just when all hope seems lost, you'll witness an alliance being formed in the most unexpected way. You'll see how a shared secret can turn a sworn enemy into your greatest protector. It's a story of how the person I thought was my biggest problem in this house suddenly became the only reason I might survive it. Stick with me, because today is about a failed escape, a shocking confession, and a desperate message sent into the dark that will change the course of this entire story. Let's get into it. Let's get into it. I thought the hardest part of my grand escape would be sneaking past Michael's office or getting the car started without making a sound. I was wrong. The hardest part was getting past my own daughter's door. With my duffel bag clutched in my hand, I slipped into her room. The only light was the glow from her phone, her face illuminated, her thumbs flying across the screen. I knelt by her bed, my voice a desperate whisper. "Chloe, honey, pack a bag. We have to go, now." She didn't even look up at first. When she finally did, her face was a mask of pure annoyance, like I'd just asked her to take out the trash during the season finale of her favorite show. "Go where?" she said, her voice heavy with teenage sighs. "Are you fighting with Michael again?" I tried to convey the urgency, the fear, without terrifying her. "It's more complicated than that," I pleaded. "Please, just trust me." She looked at me, not with fear or confusion, but with that stubborn, defiant glint I knew all too well. And then she did it. She held up her phone, her shield against the world, and delivered the one line that stopped my escape plan dead in its tracks. "I'm not going anywhere until I talk to Dad." And just like that, the floor fell out from under me. She wasn't texting a friend. She was calling Mark. My entire escape plan, my desperate, terrified run for safety, was about to be broadcast live to the one person I needed to hide from. And that's when I learned the most brutal lesson. When a manipulator is truly good at their job, they don't just turn your child against you. They convince your child that their poison is the only antidote. My daughter wasn't just disobeying me. She was checking in with her real commander-in-chief. In that moment, standing in her messy bedroom, he had won. His brainwashing had worked. Defeated, heartbroken, completely out of options, I turned to leave her room, my mind just a blank wall of static. And that's when I saw him, the second and far more unexpected obstacle of the night, standing right in my path. Defeated and heartbroken, I stumbled out of Chloe's room, my mind just a blank wall of static. My escape plan, already on life support, was now officially dead on arrival. I didn't even know what my next move was. And that's when I saw him, the second and far more unexpected obstacle of the night. Leo was just standing there, a silent sentinel in the dim hallway light, completely blocking my path. He wasn't looking at me. His eyes were fixed on one thing, and one thing only, the duffel bag in my hand. My heart, already doing a terrified tap dance against my ribs, just stopped cold. He knew. He finally lifted his head, and his voice cut through the silence. It wasn't the voice of a moody teenager anymore. It was low, steady, and scarily calm. "Where are you going?" I couldn't form a sentence. My brain just short-circuited. "Leo, it's complicated," I stammered, clutching the bag tighter. "Please, just move." He didn't flinch. He just stood his ground, an immovable object. And then he said the two words that sealed my fate. "No, you're not leaving." And that was it. I was trapped. My brilliant escape plan was being held hostage by a 16-year-old with a sketchbook and what I assumed was a massive grudge. I braced myself for the inevitable, for him to start yelling, to call for his dad, to accuse me of abandoning them. My mind was racing. Was he protecting his father? Did he see me as the villain? The homewrecker fleeing the scene of the crime? It's a funny thing about being in a crisis. You see everything through the filter of your own fear. You make assumptions based on the story you're already telling yourself. And the story I was telling myself was that this boy hated me, that he was just an extension of his father, another soldier in the army against me. I braced for the accusation, for him to call me the evil stepmother trying to tear his family apart. But the words that came out of his mouth next, they weren't about defending his father. They were about protecting his mother. I braced myself for the accusation. I was ready for him to yell, to call me a homewrecker, to blame me for everything. But the words that came out of his mouth weren't for his father. They were for his mother. He finally looked up from the bag and met my eyes. And in that moment, the moody, quiet teenager I thought I knew vanished. The look in his eyes was ancient, filled with a sadness and a knowledge no kid should ever have to carry. "You read it, didn't you?" he asked, his voice low and certain. "Her diary." The question hit me like a physical blow. There was no point in lying. I couldn't. I just stood there, frozen, and gave a single tiny nod. He nodded back, like I had confirmed something he already knew. "I knew you would." And then, he said something that sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. "I saw you take the key." He saw me. He had been watching me this whole time. The quiet observer in the corner, the boy I thought was lost in his own world, hadn't missed a thing. And then, he delivered the line that changed everything. "You think you're the first person to try and leave him?" he asked, a bitter, heartbreaking wisdom in his voice. "She tried, many times." The words just hung there between us, and in that instant, his entire persona, everything I thought I knew about him, dissolved and reformed into something new. The silent glares, the anger over the attic bedroom, his fierce protection of her memory, it all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. My God, he knew. All along, his anger, his silence, they weren't because he blamed me for replacing his mother. They were because he was terrified I'd suffer the same fate. He wasn't trying to protect his father. He was trying to protect me. His quiet resistance wasn't defiance. It was a desperate attempt to warn me. He hadn't built a fortress around his grief to keep me out. He built it to keep his father's darkness from getting to anyone else. And as I stood there, utterly speechless, I realized this quiet boy had been carrying a secret so much heavier and for so much longer than I ever could have imagined. He just looked at me, this sad, old soul expression on his face, And then he gave a slight nod toward his bedroom. I followed him, the duffel bag suddenly feeling heavy and pointless in my hand. We walked into his room, and for the first time, it didn't feel like enemy territory. It felt like a sanctuary. He didn't say another word. He just knelt on the floor, reached under his bed, and slid out a loose floorboard I never would have noticed. From the dark space beneath, he pulled out a dusty, flat portfolio. It wasn't a secret stash of comic books or candy. It was his mother's secret history. He opened it on his bed, and my breath caught in my throat. Inside was a stack of old, yellowed letters and dozens of charcoal sketches. "She gave these to me," Leo said, his voice barely a whisper. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for me to understand the weight of what he was about to say. "She told me to keep them safe. She said if anything ever happened to her, I should find a man named Daniel, D." He carefully laid out the evidence. There were letters in his mother's elegant, looping script, but there were others, in a stronger, more masculine hand, all signed with that single mysterious initial. And then there were the sketches. My God, the sketches! The ones on top were beautiful. Landscapes, flowers, a joyful-looking portrait of Leo as a little boy. But as he dug deeper into the pile, the art changed. It got darker. The lines became jagged, frantic. The beautiful landscapes were replaced by haunting images of birds in cages, of flowers wilting behind bars, of shadowy, faceless figures standing in doorways. And that was the lesson I learned right there, in that quiet bedroom. Art is never just art. Sometimes it's a confession. Sometimes it's a map of someone's pain. And sometimes it's a desperate cry for help, left behind for the one person you trust to understand it. In that small, dark room, surrounded by a dead woman's secrets, the wall between me and my stepson didn't just crack. It completely crumbled. We weren't just a stepmother and a grieving son anymore. We were two survivors, looking at the same wreckage, finally seeing the same truth. In that small, dark room, surrounded by a dead woman's secrets, the wall between me and my stepson didn't just crack, it completely crumbled. We weren't a stepmother and a grieving son anymore. We were two survivors. I sat down on the edge of his bed, right next to him, and we looked through the letters together. My duffel bag lay forgotten on the floor, my escape plan now a distant memory. The letters told a story of a woman desperate to leave, of a man on the outside trying to help her, and of the growing fear that was suffocating her. And as we sat there, a single tear rolled down Leo's cheek, and then another. For the first time since I'd met him, I saw him cry. But these weren't the hot, angry tears of a teenager fighting for territory. These were the quiet, heavy tears of a child who had been forced to carry an adult's burden for far, far too long. He had been a silent guardian of his mother's pain, and the weight of it was finally breaking him. I didn't say anything. I didn't offer any platitudes or empty reassurances. There are moments in life so heavy that words just feel cheap. So I did the only thing I could think of. I put my hand on his shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but in the silent language of our shared grief, it was a treaty. It was an apology for not understanding sooner. It was a promise. He finally looked up at me, his eyes red but clear, and I knew what I had to say. "We're going to figure this out, Leo," I said softly, but with a conviction I hadn't felt all day. Together. You're not alone in this anymore. It's a powerful lesson to learn. that sometimes the strongest bonds aren't forged in happiness, they're forged in shared pain. In that moment, we were no longer defined by the roles we were supposed to play, stepmother, stepson. We were just two people who knew the same terrible secret and who were now officially on the same team. Our fragile, brand new alliance was born in the quiet secrecy of that bedroom, but the clock was ticking, and the sound of a car pulling into the driveway suddenly shattered our moment of peace, reminding us that the man we were hiding from was home. Our fragile alliance was born in the quiet secrecy of that bedroom, but the clock was ticking. The sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway shattered our moment of peace and sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through both of us. He was home. We moved with a silent, frantic urgency. It was like a two-person spy movie. Leo carefully gathered the letters and sketches, hiding the portfolio back in its secret compartment under the floorboards. I grabbed my duffel bag from the floor, ran into my bedroom, and shoved it deep into the back of my closet, burying it under a pile of sweaters. I took a deep breath, smoothed my hair, and walked back out into the hallway, trying to look as casual as someone who hadn't just plotted a failed escape and formed a secret alliance with her stepson. Michael walked through the front door, and he looked different. The storm had passed. The cold fury in his eyes was gone, replaced by a look of weary regret. He saw me standing at the top of the stairs, and his face softened. He was putting the mask back on. "Jess," he said, his voice soft and full of apology, "I'm so sorry. I lost my temper. It won't happen again." And there it was, the most classic, predictable, and dangerous part of the whole ugly dance. First comes the explosion, that terrifying show of rage and control. And then comes the apology tour, the promises, the performance of the remorseful, loving husband who just wants to make things right. And now, I was seeing the exact same performance from Michael. But this time, it was different. This time, I wasn't buying a ticket to the show. I wasn't falling for the sad eyes or the promises that things would change. Because this time, I wasn't alone. Michael looked at me, his arms slightly open, expecting me to come down the stairs, to fall into his arms, to offer the forgiveness he felt he was owed. But he didn't see the quiet boy standing in the shadows of the hallway just behind me, a silent partner in my rebellion. Michael looked up at me, his arms slightly open, expecting forgiveness. He was waiting for me to play my part in our little drama, to come down the stairs, accept his apology, and pretend the monster I'd seen a few hours ago didn't exist. But he didn't see the boy standing behind me in the shadows. As Michael took a step toward the staircase, ready to come up and close the distance between us, Leo moved. He stepped out of the hallway and stood slightly in front of me, a quiet, unassuming bodyguard I never knew I had. Michael stopped, a little confused, and then Leo spoke. His voice was calm, but it was edged with a coldness that made the air in the house drop a few degrees. "I think you should give her some space, Dad." The words, so simple and so direct, hit Michael like a physical blow. He froze, his mouth slightly open. I could practically see the gears turning in his head, trying to process what had just happened. His son, his quiet, loyal, artistic son, who had always been on his team, had just publicly and unapologetically taken my side. He had drawn a line in the sand, and he had chosen to stand on it with me. Michael's eyes darted from Leo's defiant face to mine, and in that split second, the remorseful mask he had been wearing began to crack. The hurt vanished, and that familiar, ugly flicker of suspicion and anger began to smolder in his eyes again. He was being challenged. His authority was being questioned by his own son, for me. It was a small act of defiance, just a few simple words. But in the silent, cold war we were fighting in that house, it was a full-blown declaration. The lines had just been completely redrawn. It was no longer Michael and his son against the outsiders. It was now me and his son against him. That night, the house was a powder keg, humming with a new, dangerous tension. Michael was watching my every move, his suspicion now aimed at both of us. But here's the thing about being a mastermind of control: you get so focused on the threat you can see, you completely miss the one that's happening right under your nose. He wasn't watching his son. That night, the house was a powder keg. Every creak of the floorboards felt like a countdown to an explosion. Michael was downstairs, a storm contained in a human body, watching my every move with a suspicion that was a physical force in the air. But the master of control makes one fatal mistake. They get so focused on the threat they think they know, they completely miss the real rebellion happening right under their nose. He was watching me, but he wasn't watching his son. From the hallway, my own breath held tight in my chest, I watched him. To his father, it probably looked like he was just doing homework, losing himself in some digital art project. But I knew better. This wasn't homework. This was warfare. His face, illuminated by the cold blue light of the screen, was a mask of pure concentration. He wasn't scrolling through social media. He wasn't playing a game. He was hunting. His fingers flew across the keyboard, searching art forums, digging through archives of local galleries from years ago. And then he stopped. I could see it clearly from my spot in the shadows. A simple profile, a name that made the air in my lungs freeze. Daniel D. Moreau, artist. The ghost from his mother's diary, the man she told Leo to find. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure Michael could hear it from downstairs. I saw Leo take a deep, shaky breath, his knuckles white as he gripped the mouse. Next to the name, a cursor blinked in an empty message box, cold, impatient. And then he began to type. My name is Leo Harrison. You don't know me, but you knew my mother, Sarah. He paused. The blinking cursor felt like a ticking bomb. She told me to find you if anything ever happened. Another pause, another second stretching into an eternity. Something has happened. The message just sat there, 3 simple sentences, holding the weight of a decade of secrets and pain. Leo's eyes flickered from the screen to his closed bedroom door, listening for any sound from downstairs. The house remained silent. He moved the cursor. It hovered over the word send for what felt like a lifetime. A single click could change everything. It could save us, or it could get us killed. He didn't hesitate. Click. A single click shattered the silence in that room. It was a digital flare, shot into the darkness, hoping someone, somewhere, was still watching the sky for a signal from a woman who had disappeared long ago. The message was sent. The real war had just begun. When I first walked into this house, I thought I knew who the enemies were. I was prepared for a battle with a rebellious teenage girl who saw me as an intruder, and a long-distance war with a manipulative ex-husband who refused to let go. I was so wrong. I started this night trying to run away. My escape plan stopped cold by a daughter who chose her father's lies over my protection. I felt completely and utterly alone. But my greatest ally wasn't someone from the outside. He was already here. He was the quiet, angry boy I thought hated me, the one I was most afraid of. He wasn't guarding his father's secrets, he was guarding his mother's. And in that little bedroom, surrounded by her pain and her art, we were brought together by a single, powerful goal: to protect the true memory of his mother and to make damn sure I didn't become her echo. A message has now been sent into the void, a distress signal, to the only other person in the world who might know the truth about what really happened to Sarah. But will he answer? And what will happen when Michael finds out that his own son has contacted the one man he hates most in the world? So I have to ask you, what does your gut tell you? Do you think contacting Dee was the right move, or did Leo just put them both in even more danger? Was this the right move or a dangerous one? Let me know in the comments below. And you absolutely cannot miss episode 7. The message gets a reply. Chloe's loyalty is tested in a way you won't see coming, and the hunt for the truth officially begins. Subscribe now so you're the first to see what happens next.